Welcome to Wickerson Studios. I'm creating some pretty interesting geometries now, and although I meant to continue with the math utilities and cover some of these manipulation tools for numbers, average, interpolate data, smooth numbers, and things like that, I did get a little sidetracked, and I figured, well, let's just play with the points. And I went in and I actually generated more of an animation. So I'm going to shut this down and shut this down and show you as this is going to take some time. I'm going to do a quick animation here, just of probably 10 frames, 12 frames. We'll do it, and you can see what happens to the geometry. As that sphere moves through, it kind of blasts more negatives and has an effect on this other sphere that's underneath. It's not so interesting to look at right here, but you can see in those 11 frames, how am I Boolean differencing those with the geometries? And what I've done is I will take the renderings and put them, get rid of them, and maybe running that animation again would show that in the sense of 12 animation. You see how it becomes different geometry because that attractor point or that other kind of ball is moving and affecting this one. I'll show you how that affects it. So we're at the 10, 11, 12 count. We'll put on all the geometries and have a look at it. I will ungroup it, and you can see I built basically a, let me take this back to shaded. Basically, I built a polygon. I affected it, I had a cell count. I didn't need to set this with rounded radius corners, but I did. But I made an array of this moving out in different directions. There's the geometry that I actually, finding centroid is probably critical for the script. And what I did was you deal with vectors. And the vectors are somewhere between the points you bring on. And there's a point in here that I have to extract. I think I internalized it. It should be there, but actually I had the point here. Let me move it out of the way. It'll affect the script. And let me take these and put it in hiding again. And then that piece of geometry becomes the basis of manipulating this geometry. So as I move that one around, you can see I have the other ones on show. That little piece of geometry changes everything that's in here. And you deal with vectors, and the tool that I'm using mainly as I'm finding out these vectors and what direction they're going, and I'm visualizing them all the time as I move through, is I've used the GraphMapper and a couple of signs through a Remap Plus tool, which is one that's worth downloading. It just makes the remap a little easier than having to go in and do the bounds and the domain every time you do it. And it also unitizes things and brings things 1 to 0, 0 to 1, so it's nice. But I'm using the Orient Direction tool, which is really where you've taken geometry and you've played with it and you're able to manipulate that geometry. It's a little slow because I've got it through an extrusion, but as I push these numbers around, you see those geometries do change and are affected. That said, I can go back and show you more of those as it gets settled. Best to take off there's all the points all crammed in one corner, surfaces and extrusion. It's made these very interesting geometries that are solid that I can then cap. And I can move, once again, the sphere in different directions if I want to play with it off of another XYZ vector. And I do a Boolean difference and cut out all these wonderful shapes. So you can have an effect with that ball. And that ball's just been made big so I can visualize it. But it really is just a point. So as that one's moving through, you can have a nice little effect on what you're doing. You can manually move that if you want. And just give it a minute to load. It takes 3 seconds to load. And there we go. We've got a pretty boring cut when you bring it down here. When it's on the XY plane, it's kind of boring. But when you bring it up into the Z direction, it starts to do some really cool vector changes. You end up with this excellent internal shape. And then I put it into a couple of rendering colors. And I think, yeah, that's what I'm playing. And they're actually an interesting little script, yellow, blue, and orange that's coming here from being separate because it doesn't hold. Whenever this blasts in actual separate pieces, little colors come out, and that's because I added a very colorful kind of exploded tree form on the end. Now you can still go into here, and it's slow to do it, but you can still go in here and manipulate the vectors and multiply and amplify them that affect the orient direction. From as long as your vectors are different, you should be able to use this tool. So just playing with one little node, having an awful lot of fun with it. Grabbing in here all the geometries and see what's actually there. This is quite a complex little geometry to visualize and get your head around, but the effects of it are just terrific. So I love what it ends up doing, and I love the control that I can have over it. Bring your stuff back to points, bring it back to vectors, and then you're playing with numbers and you're playing with math. And that's about it. So I think I can get those colors back on here if I made it look pretty, but now I have to take off my visuals, preview off. Yeah, there they are. Some nice little colors, and you can always, like I said, I like that kind of bonus whenever something splits and because it becomes another piece. You can have fun rendering within this color scheme, some pretty horrible colors, and then you know, see what happens. And I do like that animation. I mean, I never would have thought to animate and make a geometry like this, but I can freeze it at any way I want, so I can bring that back to here, play with the position of that point. You get multiple points that affect this as well. And it's kind of making that little Death Star Star Wars thing. But I find it very interesting to build these geometries and think about that. I can't say I would ever make that world, but as I explore it, it's kind of fun to go into it and see what's happening. So enjoy yourself.